Happy Friday night, everybody. Welcome to our first edition of Fire Up Florida. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Manmouth. Been waiting a long time to do this show, and now it is here. And what better time can you do it when you kick off with the NFL draft? But tonight is day two. Meanwhile, my co-hosts are first and foremost my sports writer, Greg Fuchs of the South Florida Tribune. Greg's going to be a part of this operation. Greg, glad that you could be a part of it all, buddy.
Excited to be here for the first Fire Up Florida episode.
And, of course, Madman Mancini, M Square, Mark Mancini. I've been on a lot of Mark's programs where we started in Philadelphia. We've been to Oakland, you name it. And he's got a lot of other things lined up. But more importantly, we have our own gig. Mark, it's so glad to finally have something that we can call our own. Welcome to the big show.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a show that's sweeping the country, baby. This is the top dog on Fridays, man. This is it, man. I'm jacked up. You got Greg there. You got yourself there. Your wife producing everything, man. I am jacked and ready to go.
I can hardly tell with that energy level. I can only, and you're on the West Coast. So, Mark, why don't you let me tell everybody what Fire Up Florida is all about, okay? Fire Up Florida is a broadcast that's going to talk about sports and non-sports related topics as well in the Sunshine State. Doesn't matter whether it's Tampa, Jacksonville, Orlando, Southern Florida. It doesn't matter. There might be times where I might find a very interesting issue since we're on the governor's mailing list as well. If it's a topic that's not too over the top, we will not ignore it. So I want to make sure that there will be no stones unturned at all. So be prepared for anything, folks, because we're not limiting anything on Fire Up Florida. If it's out there, it's worth talking about, it will be on this show. So with that said, Mark, I know plenty about Greg Fuchs, but I want everybody to learn a little bit about you. You know, Mancini Sports, tell us a little bit about what Mancini Sports is all about, and you can tell. And don't give me all the information about how that you'll be in the Guinness Book of World Records or how many podcasts you have. We don't have that much time tonight.
No, I just, I'm blessed. I built up this thing. I'm currently with XM Sirius on Fridays, and I'm blessed to do a Pittsburgh Pirates podcast with first base coach Tarek Bach for my second year, and just being a part of this thing in Florida is great. Great people. I always say, money comes and goes, but relationships are priceless. And this is a caring network across the board with all you guys. And I can't wait to be a big part of Florida right now, man.
Well, we're really happy to have you. And I appreciate the fact that you reached out to me, on another platform and saw what we were trying to do and that you engaged and wanted me to be a part of this whole Mancini Sports empire that you have, as well as what we're doing at South Florida Tribune. With that said, okay, Greg, why don't you go ahead and lead off? Obviously, we're going to focus tonight on the NFL draft Florida style. So, Greg, you set the table. We have three teams to talk about. Want to make sure that everybody has an overview of what's going on. And then we'll have this bad boy wrapped up by 8 Eastern time at the latest. But I can guarantee you one thing, folks, okay? We will have an awful lot of information. So sit tight and let's go along for the ride. All right, Greg, take over.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, well, the name of the show is Fire Up Florida, and with the NFL draft being the big topic in the sports world these days, wanted to talk about how the three Florida NFL teams did, what they did. I've been telling anyone that's willing to listen in the last 24 hours that the team that had the best first-round draft pick in the draft this year was the Miami Dolphins. And most people are going, wait, Dolphins didn't even have a draft pick. And that's technically true, but they traded it away a few weeks ago for Tyreek Hill. Everyone knows how impactful and special a talent he is. Is any other player in this NFL draft going to be as good as Tyreek Hill? It's always possible. Yep, we don't know yet, but that is one high benchmark that Tyreek Hill has set. And I think the Dolphins are just ecstatic about not having to draft someone this year because they got Tyreek Hill.
So, Greg, when do you estimate that the Dolphins are going to make their first pick tonight?
They're not picking the slot 102. It's going to be around 11:30 at night. So stay up late, have some caffeine, Dolphin fans.
Well, that doesn't apply to Mancini. He's on the West Coast, so there'll be a walk in the park for Mancini. So, All right, so let's continue to talk briefly about the Fish because they're in the whole lot, and then we'll move on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And for those of you that are watching here on the South Florida Tribune, I am wearing a Jaguars cap and I'm wearing a Jaguars shirt. After all, they're the only ones that selected anybody anyways, and I cover the Jaguars, and I'm on the media distribution list for the Dolphins as well. So, any other thing you want to mention about the Dolphins before we proceed?
Not much to say about the Dolphins. I mean, Tyreek Hill is it. They have that one pick in tonight's draft. Best player available, maybe a linebacker, running back, center. The Jaguars were the one team in Florida that actually did something last night. And as we all know, they had the first pick in the draft for the second year in a row, which is never a good thing, except on draft night. They drafted Trevor Lawrence last year. Hopefully he's their franchise quarterback. And last night they drafted someone who, in my mind, was a little controversial. They took Georgia defensive lineman Trayvon Walker. Now, in terms of athletic ability, speed, athleticism, et cetera, this guy is off the charts. My problem with him, his productivity in college wasn't that great. And I've heard people say, well, Georgia didn't use him properly. I don't know if I totally buy that. And my problem with Walker isn't, hey, if you took him at 20th in the draft or the first pick in the second round, fantastic. But for a guy who wasn't overly productive in college, to take him as the first pick in the NFL draft, that's gutsy on Jacksonville's part. Personally, if they were locked into getting a defensive end, I would have gone with Aiden Hutchinson. I am very impressed with that guy. Incredibly quality person, extremely motivated, been potentially a better pick, definitely a much safer pick. Okay, Walker could end up being the better player, but I don't think there's much downside with Hutchinson.
All right, so let me go out there and throw some numbers at you folks out there. First of all, Walker had a total of 37 tackles, 7.5 for loss, with 6 sacks, okay? He had 2 pass deflections and forced a fumble in 15 games, all of which were starts. He's played in 36 games at Georgia, full-time starter as a junior. And, of course, he led the Dogs defensive line with snaps about 56% in 2021. Of course, we all know that Georgia Bulldogs have their first title in 41 years. But I think the one thing that's important, Mark, and I know that we're educating you on these parts a little bit, is you've got the familiarity factor of the Southeastern Conference, okay? Florida takes on Georgia every year at TIAA Bank Stadium. So it's not like you have to really go ahead and send any scouts to see this guy. You know, it's one of the biggest rivalries in college football in the Southeastern Conference. They call it the border war. But I think what you've got, Greg and Mark, in this particular situation is the fact that Jacksonville signed offensive linemen during the offseason, so they had to focus on the defensive side of the ball. Now, one of the reasons that Byron Leftwich did not want to take the Jacksonville job is he didn't want to work with Trent Baalke. I know that there's a lot of talk about that. Doug Peterson doesn't have a problem. After all, Doug Peterson, by the way, did win the Super Bowl with the Eagles. So when you talk about the divide, there might have been a little bit of a divide between Baalke and Peterson, but ultimately, in my opinion, you ended up with Trayvon Walker, and I can't complain about it being a Metro Detroit guy because Aiden Hutchinson happened to fall into the laps of the Detroit Lions, and I was hoping that Aiden Hutchinson would fall to the Lions, and thankfully it worked out. You got a guy in the South, Mark, okay, who's going to play in the South. Hutchinson's going to play in the Midwest, so I think it kind of, at least on the surface, it works out really well. All right, Mark, any thoughts about what we've talked about here?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I think Trayvon Walker was, he reminds me of a Chase Young type, a Lawrence Taylor, and I know Georgia threw 5 first rounders in there, in the first round. So I like the pick. I mean, they're building something in Jacksonville. Can they get it back to the Mark Brunell days there? That's been the mindset there. They got a good owner there. It's been downtrodden times at times. I did radio in Jacksonville too, so I can remember some of the good times there. But when you look at the Jaguars, I think they're building something now. Trevor Lawrence was the quarterback last year, and I don't care what anybody else says because I like Trevor Lawrence at Clemson. Now you bring in a defensive end there. I think the Jags are well on their way. The only downfall of this whole thing is I wish the Jags were in the NFC because the AFC to me is the SEC conference. When I look at the NFC, this thing could look like the Big Sky, man. Can you find 5 teams in the NFC that are really legit? I see 3. I can't even get 5 teams in the NFC that are legit teams to represent them in the Super Bowl.
Now, I know Greg mentioned an offensive lineman named Akeem Ekwonu is a guy that you were looking at. And you know what? I wondered about that pick too. But again, as the week went on, and then you want to talk about the society that we're really living in. Okay, now you got bettors trying to bet who you're going to have. Are they going to bet on Trayvon Walker, Aiden Hudson? This was unheard of 5-10 years ago, betting on who's going to take what. But, I know that would have been an obvious choice because, again, you're trying to keep your quarterback on your feet. And they're going to have the return of Travis Etienne, who missed his first year due to an injury. And Travis Etienne has a pretty good sense of humor. But if there's ever a year to miss, at least I missed it when Urban Meyer was the coach. So the kid doesn't lack a sense of humor. So you have a good running back, obviously, with Etienne when he finally gets going, and Lawrence. And I had a chance to see Lawrence last year. I went to a couple of Jaguars games. Very cool customer, and I'm glad that they're not going to wreck him with Doug Peterson. So you talk about an offensive lineman. I know, Greg, that was a name that was being bannered until they ended up going ahead and settling on the guy that he did. So now, obviously, we know Ekwonu was selected 6th overall by Carolina as the number 1 offensive lineman off the board. And that's an interesting dynamic. I don't want to get too far off base here with this. And I know that Carolina's talked about getting a quarterback at some point. But my feeling is don't write off Sam Darnold too quick, okay? And the reason why is give the guy a couple receivers and an offensive lineman. I don't care how good you are as a quarterback. If you don't have a decent offensive line, you're in trouble, Mark.
Well, you are in trouble, but the problem is there's a lot of problems in Carolina. This team, ever since they were in the Super Bowl against New England, they've kind of downtrodden at times and everything. And this is a situation that's been happening with that team for quite a while. I like Darnold. I liked him with New York. I thought if they were going to go that route, then you could have got that tight end that Atlanta picked up from Florida last year and fit him right in New York. But they jettisoned Darnold to Carolina, and this is the problem. These quarterbacks we're talking about, they're not like when we were, growing up. John Elway would carry a clipboard for a year and learn the system. These guys are getting, they're getting thrown in the fire right away. You see what the situation is, and I don't want to get too off on it, but San Francisco, Chicago, the Jets, they're going through quarterbacks because they don't let these guys study the system. They throw them in there. There's money behind them, and that's why they're bust.
Well, there's no question that you said a mouthful, Mark. And I mean that in the right way because I've grown up, obviously, around the league, and the average quarterback never went ahead and saw the field for at least 2 to 3 years. Yeah. Some of your best quarterbacks, for example, Aaron Rodgers held a clipboard for a few years, and the list goes on and on. So everything you're saying, Mark, is on point. You talk about being thrown into the fire. Well, fire up Florida. Let's have a little fire analogies while we're at it, okay? But throwing into the fire, that's what a lot of these quarterbacks are doing. They're being thrust into action before they're really, really ready. And again, for me, and Greg and I went over this the other day, what do you constitute as a bust? I constitute as a bust, okay, a guy that not, to me, if he's had a lot of coaching changes, both offensive coordinator and head coach, I'm a little bit more sympathetic there because a quarterback cannot have too much instability at the most important positions. But again, that'll be for another topic another day. But everybody has an opinion on that. So again, I'm not going off on Darnold or talk about any quarterback per se. But to me, a bust is not a quarterback that has too many head coaching changes and offensive coordinator. Doesn't work that way. So again, we're not talking about Darnold per se. In this particular instance, we're talking about the offensive lineman. But I think the Jaguars are going to be all right. They're looking for some defensive help, and they certainly – I don't think they could have gone wrong with either Walker or Hutchinson. And now, you know what? You're going to live with the guy you have, so it doesn't matter. And we have another couple of rounds yet. We're only talking about round 1. After we get done here, there's an awful lot more players. And I want people to understand that the words hidden gems are what you're going to be seeing over the next 48 hours. So this thing is far from done. With that said, Greg, continue on about what the Jaguars continue to do.
Yeah, in regards, just to pick up what you're saying about the offensive lineman, I'll admit I have a personal bias when it comes to developing a football team. Once you get that franchise quarterback, build that offensive line. And as we all know, there's 5 guys on the offensive line. I mean, as a Dolphin fan, I know they signed Armstead and Williams this season as free agents. Half of that offensive line, well, not half, because Robert Hunt's pretty good. That center and right tackle are still huge question marks for the Dolphins. And if you have 2 bad players out of 5, you can be in trouble on that offensive line. So if it was me, I would have gone with the offensive lineman. But, Jacksonville is trying to build their defense, which I get. And with their second pick in the first round, which they traded up with the Buccaneers, so to move up 6 spots, they gave up their second round pick and their a fourth and a sixth, I believe. And then they got a player I really liked in Utah linebacker Devin Floyd. He was one guy. If the Dolphins had a first round pick, he's exactly what they need. So I think that is a great pick and a great trade by the Jaguars. I think if they hadn't traded up, he wouldn't have been there 6 picks later. So a big fan of Devin Lloyd in Utah.
Any thoughts? After all, Mark, he's a West Coast guy. If anybody should know a little bit about Devin Lloyd, I would think you should, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I like the pickups and everything, and getting to where you look at the Dolphins, and I know you and I have had conversations on this, Scott. The stability of this team since the 72 team that went 14-0, and nobody's going to match that, that had a successful coach in Don Shula. I like the quarterback that came out of Pitt there, and Dan Marino. When I look at this team down the years, it struggled with the quarterback position. We've seen the David Woodleys. We've seen some of these guys that have come through the system. I don't know if Tua is the guy that's going to lead you to the promised land there. I look at Tua like I look at Kyler Murray in Arizona. They're too short to look over that defense, and that's the problem there. And the other thing with the Dolphins is, guys, and you're right down there with them, they start out like a bat out of hell. They kind of remind me of UCLA out here. But when, they need to win a game to get in the playoffs or something, a few years ago, all they had to do, I think, was beat the Jets down there. And they let the Steelers come in and steal that pick as far as getting in the playoffs. So I think in Miami, it's a team that is built on tradition. But what have you done for me lately?
Yeah, no question about that, Mark. A couple of things I want to point out too, though. When I want to go back up I-95 North right now with Jacksonville, if I can, okay? And that's this. Number one, Miami lost to Jacksonville last year, and they started out badly, 1-7. And this game, I think, Greg, didn't it take place in London? Okay, I think they ended up winning.
The Dolphins had won that game, they would have been in the playoffs.
Right, and I actually saw the Jaguars play a playoff game when they beat the Buffalo Bills. I think it was 10-3 a few years ago. But let's not lose sight of the fact that we all know, and all three of us are old enough to appreciate the fact that, defense wins championships. And I can tell that right now that Jacksonville tried to instill that philosophy in the first round. Now, again, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 days. They also signed Josh Allen as well. So he's still in the mix for a while. That was one of the picks I actually did hit on. So defense wins championships. Again, the key that we're going to find out the next 2 days is what's going to happen, Mark and Greg, in rounds 2 and 3 when we revisit this again. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, and here's the thing. What happened to the Jacksonville team that was the only team that came into Pittsburgh and beat them twice in the same season?
Right.
The team that had Bortles and Fournette and all that. What happened to that team? Why is it going back to where it is now? And in some ways, maybe it had to go to a complete rebuild where you had to get back-to-back number 1 picks. What happened to the team that steamrolled the Steelers that should have went to New England and represented the AFC in the Super Bowl?
Well, that's an excellent question, Mark. And covering the Jaguars like I do, I'll give you 2 words: Tom Coughlin. Tom Coughlin's way of trying to run a team, he was better on the field as a coach, not an administrator. You can't build a culture in this day and age with today's player that you did back when you were coaching. You can't. And people soured off on him. And why do you think he got fired relatively quickly by Shad Khan, versus previous ownership? The Jaguars, the culture, and everything that Tom Coughlin did, everything's going well, Mark and Greg, when you're winning. But, you don't want to aggravate Leonard Fournette, who, to me, how has Leonard Fournette done, Mark, when he left the Jaguars? Well, he's got a Super Bowl in his pocket. Didn't hurt that a change of scenery with Tom Brady and the rest of that Buccaneers culture. So if you're going to ask me why things went south so quickly, I'll tell you right now, my opinion, having been close to it, Tom Coughlin didn't help. Doug Marrone really wasn't totally at fault for what went wrong there. He did take a dump hill finishing 10-6, and all of a sudden the culture ended up falling apart. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, the big problem there was you let a good guy go in Jack Del Rio. And look what he's doing with the Washington Commanders team up there, working with it, So that's the big problem. I don't understand why they let a guy like Jack Del Rio go, too, who was very successful in my book down there.
Yeah, I like Jack Del Rio. All right, so now we've talked about the Jaguars and the Dolphins. So the problem that we have with the Miami Dolphins, they've gone through so many coaches under Stephen Ross, and they've been very dysfunctional. Greg, we give everybody a brief overview about how many coaching changes. We had another 15, 20 minutes left to go in the show, but give everybody a basic overview of how the coaches ended up dropping. In fact, the Lions hired Dan Campbell, an interim guy who was, I think, 5-7 with the Dolphins. And I think Dan Campbell's going to do a job, but we won't talk about that tonight. But, let's talk about the Dolphins culture, since we're comparing and contrasting cultures between the Dolphins and the Jaguars real quickly.
Yeah, I think culture starts at the top. I think one of my prime example of any professional sports team, I think it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, they've had the same ownership since 1930, whatever. And they've had 3 head coaches in the last 50 odd years, give or take. That's stability. If there's someone they trust and they like, they'll stick with them. Just because you lose a few games doesn't mean you fire somebody. The Dolphins, on the other hand, dysfunctional is the word. I mean, people complain about the Lions and the Jets, deservedly so, just as equally dysfunctional, but just constant turnover at the general manager position, assistant general manager, head coaching, coordinator positions. Every year, it's like they're installing new offensive and defensive systems. And they haven't put their faith in anybody. And some of their hires, I think, were just laughable. Adam Gase, I thought, was a terrible hire at the time. And I can't remember the other guy, the guy who was the head coach when they went 1-15. I forget his name right now.
Well, I know you're talking about Cameron, right?
Yeah.
Cameron, I believe.
That was an unbelievable joke.
Right.
And let's face it, whoever their general manager is, they haven't exactly been hitting the ball out of the ballpark in the draft the last for the better part of the last 20 years. Chris Greer's starting to do a little better job in the last 2-3 seasons. They did a great job in the offseason this year. And, he got the Tyreek Hill, which is basically their draft, 3rd and 4th round pick they have this year. You're probably talking some guys who are probably going to be maybe a starter, but more likely a backup for the first year or two. So hopefully the Dolphins have crossed that hurdle. Chris Greer's been there for a while now. And I am very bullish, even though he hasn't coached a game as a head coach in the NFL, and Mike McDaniel. The players seem to love him, seems to be very creative on the offensive side of the ball. And the Dolphins just loaded up on the offensive side of the ball in free agency. So now it's up to McDaniel and Tua. And I don't expect Tua to be Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. I just expect him to be, I hate to use the word game manager, but, he gets rid of the ball quick. He's accurate. I think he has a good pocket presence. So he's never going to be going back to the Chiefs-Bills playoff game this year where Mahomes and Allen were just going back and forth up and down the field. That is not Tua, okay, unless they can get the ball to Tyreek Hill every time to have him take a 5-yard pass, turn it into a 50-yard touchdown. But Tua is not that guy. I mean, the Dolphins are really going to have a team approach, running game, passing game, defense, special teams. And Tua, I think, will be top 15, probably right in the middle of the pack quarterback-wise. I don't think he'll ever be a top 10 guy.
All right, Mark, I'm giving you a homework assignment, okay, over the weekend. And when you and I exchange 9 million text messages over the next week with all the different places I'm going to be on your shows, okay, I want you to go ahead and study up on a guy by the name of Bailey Zappi. Okay, Bailey Zappi. If you don't know about him, he's a kid out of Western Kentucky. All he did was throw 62 touchdowns versus 11 touchdowns and over 14,000 yards for Western Kentucky. Now, Mark, you're going to say, well, how do you know about him, Scott? Well, you know what? I'm on Western Kentucky's media distribution list. You're a guy that has more podcasts than anybody that I've ever seen, and I supplement your podcast with media distribution list. So people like me think that we can get a little bit smart, so I can give you homework assignments, okay? So if for some reason or another you see a guy like Bailey Zappi on a football field near you, which you will, okay, then you can say, you heard it on Fire Up Florida first, okay? But Bailey Zappi is a hidden gem, Mark. He really is. and you're going to hear about him a lot perhaps the next day or two. Greg, tell him about the fact that you didn't know anything about him until I put you on it, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, we were on our podcast this past Monday, and Scott dropped his name, and I said, I have never heard of this guy. So I did some research afterwards. NCAA records this past season for most yards and most touchdown passes in a season. Now I'm going, okay, but he wasn't exactly playing in the SEC, but it was still Division I football. And he did throw for 488 yards and 4 touchdowns versus Michigan State. And then I said, okay, what do the scouts think of this guy? So I looked it up, and one of the reports said he's got a great touch, he's calm, great pocket awareness, he's accurate, and he's a great leader. The only cons were not a great runner, and he's got average arm strength. And to me, I was reading, that sounds like Drew Brees. And then later on, somebody compared him to Drew Brees. Now, is he going to beat another Drew Brees? Probably not. You're talking one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. But this guy, if you're picking in the 5th or 6th round, even if you don't need a quarterback, he's worth getting. And the last thing I'll say on him, whatever you think about these Wonderlic tests that they give college athletes these days, he had the highest score of any quarterback this year.
So, Mark, I'm going to ask you a really tough question, okay? You ever heard of Josh Allen?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know where he played football at?
It was somewhere out here.
Yeah, somewhere out there. I knew you were going to say that. That's okay, Mark.
No, I know. I think it's north of me.
Yeah, of course, everything's north of you.
San Francisco and L.A.
No, anything's north of you in Southern California, okay? But you know what? Okay, I'm not very good at singing, but he played for the Wyoming Cowboys. And the Wyoming Cowboys, to me, are the equivalent to Western Kentucky. Take it for what it's worth. All right, so therefore, now on to go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, and this is what I like, because I think teams today are interested in those 15-minute car chases.
Right.
And what I mean by that is they're enthralled with the Lances from San Francisco, who I don't put too much stock in. I've never put stock in an Ohio State quarterback. When was the last Ohio State quarterback that really lasted in the NFL for more than a cup of coffee? I think it was it Byron Leftwich?
Yeah, well, Byron Leftwich was with Marshall University.
Well, what?
But I can't think of one.
Tongue-in-cheek mentality.
I'm just giving you a hard time, Mark.
Arch Leeser was a riverboat gambler. Yeah. I never put stock in these quarterbacks, but the Bears were, all giddy about these kind of guys. Justin Fields will never lead the Chicago Bears to anything. Just like the guy like Wilson in New York, they're going to have to get a quarterback in there. But when you look at the Josh Allens that came out of Wyoming, when you look at where Carson Wentz came out of, and I still like Carson Wentz if he can keep them upright, but when you see some of these other guys, I was never a Jared Goff guy, and everybody kept telling me Jared Goff. This is where the clubs don't do their research on these quarterbacks, and then they wonder after 5 games, wow, we need to draft another quarterback. Trevor Lawrence and Mac Jones, I said, were the best quarterbacks in the draft last year. They're going to be decade quarterbacks.
Well, let's face the reality. You do hit a very good point, Mark. Okay, then we'll go to Tampa Bay. Number one, Ohio State's not known for breeding quarterbacks. Joe Flacco, by the way, University of Delaware. Okay, you don't have to go to a big nine university to get a good quarterback. You just don't need to do it. Some quarterbacks produce better running backs. It just depends. And I see your point. I haven't seen. I don't recall in recent memory myself, Mark. Okay, an Ohio State quarterback that ever lit it up. People in Chicago are hoping that Fields will, but that's called a TBD in our business. So I'll go ahead and hold judgment on that until I see it in front of my 4 eyes. Okay. So with that said, we're going to take a ride down to Tampa, and I'm going to say right now, I like the hire of Todd Bowles, well earned. And I think Byron Leftwich is a head coach in waiting. And so I can tell you, I give that one a thumbs up. I also, and we'll say something you and I talked about, that I don't feel that Arians was forced out of there. That I believe that he has a good track record hiring minority coaches, and it was time for him to move on. I don't care about all the Miami speculation. I'm not going there. But, Greg, why don't you give everybody an overview of some of the things that you talked about with Tampa? And before you do that, I will say this while I have a moment to do it. I was so happy that Kenny Pickett got picked by Pittsburgh. To me, it was a great story that he didn't have to leave the building to find his new team. He probably had less travel expenses to go to his new destination than anybody, knowing that all he had to do was put his Converse All-Star sneakers, and if we get a Converse endorsement out of it, I get it, okay? Because I said it first, to go right in the facility to go to the Steelers, and I'm glad that Kenny Pickett is a Pittsburgh Steeler. That's what I'm going to say. Greg, go ahead, and we'll talk about Tampa before we call it a night.
Yeah, before we get there, I will echo. I'm a big Kenny Pickett fan. I liked him in college. One guy I sort of feel sorry for now is Mitch Trubisky, because I'm sure he was going, look, I got at least 1 year opportunity in Pittsburgh, good organization to show what I can do as a quarterback. And I'm just assuming Pickett's going to be the day one starter, unless there's an injury. So we'll see what happens there. In terms of the Buccaneers, yeah, they traded their 27th pick last night to move down 6 spots. Obviously, there probably wasn't a player that they were totally in love with at 27, or maybe the guy they were in love with. They figure he'll be there with the first pick in tonight's draft, which has already happened. I'm not sure who they picked, but they must have got someone they like. So for moving down 6 spots, I think they picked up a 4th and a 6th. So Jacksonville didn't have to give up a lot. What does Tampa need? Well, they lost Antonio Gibson. Chris Godwin's going to be out for I'm not sure how much at the beginning of the season. So I think wide receiver could be one of their big needs. They also lost Ronald Jones back up to Fournette, so they could use a running back. They lost both starting guards, and they replaced one with Shaq Mason, so they could use an offensive lineman. And I've also read they could use a cornerback. So, but I'm not feeling too sad for Tampa. You know, they still got a heck of a roster. I'm assuming they'll re-sign Gronk and Sue. But, you know, they lost a little off the team last year. I think they're losing a little bit off the team this year, so I'm not sure if they're a Super Bowl favorite. But in the division they're in, they're going to win that division going away.
All right, so let me talk about Tampa a little bit. Gronkowski, I have a feeling we'll go back there. He just needs a little time. He's just looking for an excuse to go back to training camp late anyway, so it doesn't matter. He'll do whatever he wants. And Ndamukong Suh, I think you can get him for the right price. He wants to play there. Antonio Brown, to me, was a first-class head case, okay? I'd be hard-pressed to see him get a job anywhere. And if Antonio Brown thinks that he's not going to get that surgery before he gets hired by another team, Antonio Brown, okay, if I were you, I'd go out there and have your Wheaties, okay, and I'd get the darn surgery and see if you're committed to your career, and then maybe somebody that you won't burn your bridge with might give you another opportunity. Chris Godwin, of course, anytime you're dealing with an injury situation, you know, it little takes time there. And, of course, you know, as you alluded to, a guard, running back, and a cornerback are certainly things. But, again, how can I preface what I just said, Mark and Greg? Okay, round 1 is done. Rounds 2 and 3 are what we do. And I'm going to tell you another thing, guys, okay? Don't rule out undrafted free agents. Some of your best players, okay, are signed with undrafted free agents. And I'm going to tell you what, there are an awful lot of players who are going to sign contracts and get looks. We only saw 32 of them last night. Mark, Madman Mancini, what do you have to say about that?
Here's what I want to talk about with you know, what Greg was talking about with the Steelers real quick, and I'll take a minute on that one. 3 head coaches, you're right. They've only had 3 quarterbacks in my mind: Bradshaw, Roethlisberger, and now Pickett. We've had a slew of losers there in O'Donnell that was playing for the Cowboys in the Super Bowl, Cordell Stewart. You know, you had Tommy Maddox there. You've had a lot of those kind of guys. But we've won because we've let the head cases go. We didn't need the Mike Wallaces. We don't need the Juju Schusters. We can redefine those kind of guys in Pittsburgh. And it's a system. If you're not going to confine the system in Pittsburgh and New England, then we're just going to get rid of you. And we're not going to look back, and we'll get somebody that's going to buy into the system. You see the way the Steelers brand of football is. Now, getting on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they got one guy there that is probably the best quarterback I've ever seen, and that's Tom Brady. He'll do whatever it takes to bring in guys. They don't need the cancer and Antonio Brown. They're in a division where that thing will be pretty much wrapped up before Halloween. They only got to compete with the Rams and the Packers. Maybe the Cowboys and the Commanders will do something over there. But other than that, they secure the division. They can beat up on all them teams in that division, get the home field, and roll the dice. I like Tampa Bay to represent the NFC guys. I think they got, you know, sure, they're better off with Bulls. I got to disagree with you, Scott, with Arians. Arians has, you know, burned some bridges in some cities, even Pittsburgh. I think he went to Tennessee, the Arizona thing, and then coming over. you can't run the strong arm tactics too much here with these kind of guys. You got to understand where they're coming from. And I think he finally saw the light. He figured, you know what, I better go upstairs. Maybe that's the reason Brady decided to unretire himself when he found out he was going up. Then he'll come back. I mean, that's just one man's opinion here.
All I know is Brady bought Arians from out here a $50,000 watch, I believe, right? So if you burn the bridge, that's a $50,000 bridge you burned pretty well. Not that Tom can't afford it anyway, so it doesn't matter. So I don't know, but that's okay, Mark. I encourage interaction both ends, whether I think Arians or not left. That's something that we'll talk about down the road. I think that'll be something that a lot of people will debate from now until the end of time. But in the meantime, though, talking about the presence, if Arians going to get replaced, Todd Bowles is a heck of a coach.
Oh, yeah.
He really is. He got a raw deal out in with the Jets. I think he should have been hired by the Dolphins. And I want to talk about your point a little bit about the Steelers for a moment while we have a moment. Le'Veon Bell was never the same when he left Pittsburgh either. You saw how that all worked out with the Jets and some of his other stops as well. In my opinion, if you can't play for Mike Tomlin, then there's something badly wrong with you, because I know that Mike Tomlin's one of the best coaches out there. And let's face it, the last three Pittsburgh coaches have won Super Bowls. Ever heard of Chuck Noll? Won a Super Bowl. Ever heard of Bill Cowher? Won a Super Bowl. Ever heard of Mike Tomlin? Won a Super Bowl. And here's a little something else for you, Mark. Okay, I was at Super Bowl 43 when Harrison ran that big interception back, and I always pull for the Steelers. Not hurt, they're only 4 hours away. Go ahead.
Well, no, and not only that, when you break it down like that, you look at it, and, Greg bringing up Mitch Trubisky, it's a system. So he can flourish in that system. In Chicago, he couldn't flourish because, when I look at the Bears, what have they done? They went to a Super Bowl with Rex Grossman. That was a fluke. That was, a team that just kind of snuck up on everybody in my mind. When I think of the Bears, I think of 85 when they had McMahon and all those guys. So any quarterback that's coming through that system in Chicago is going to fall on their ass. Jay Cutler wasn't a bad quarterback till he went to Denver and it fell into a system. When you look at Trubisky, when he left Chicago and went to Buffalo, he didn't play much, but he learned the system. I think what's going to happen in Pittsburgh, and I'm telling you this, guys, things run in threes. I had London going to Atlanta, Pickett going to the Steelers, Baker Mayfield or Jimmy Garoppolo will be in Pittsburgh, and Mason's going to be shown the door.
Interesting. Well, we'll monitor that situation. All right, so as we talk about the draft as it stands right now, okay, the Miami Dolphins have one pick in the third round, which is 102nd overall, as Greg mentioned, as well. And then, of course, the Jaguars have two third-round picks. The Buccaneers happen to have 2 second-round picks, which includes first and a pick, and then the second round plus the third-round pick. So that's what we currently have. And, of course, I haven't even gotten into the other ones, Greg. So why don't you pick it up from there about what's left out there for these teams?
Yeah, I mean, everyone gets hung up on the first-round picks, but second and third rounders, in my mind, all should be starters. Maybe not day one, but by the start of season 2, they should all be starters. I read one article today that everyone ranks their top 100 prospects in the draft, and they still had 7 of their top 32 available in the second round. So there's 7 guys who they thought should have gone in the first round. They're available in the second round today. 2 of my favorite guys, and I know running backs don't get a lot of love these days, but Kenny Walker from Michigan State and Breece Hall from Iowa State, those guys are going to be studs. They can be legitimate 3-down backs, and someone's going to take them in the second round today and be ecstatic.
Yeah, there you go, Mark. I'm telling you, we've been saying.
Well, not only that, the big shocker, I think, was the quarterbacks. We didn't even see quarterbacks in the top 10 picks. With the multiple picks, the Giants and I was surprised the Giants didn't go after anybody. But if you're going to tell me who won the draft so far, I'd have to tell you guys. I'm going to throw it out there. I'd have to say the Giants, Jets, and maybe the Eagles.
You know what? I was thinking the same thing. I'm a little surprised, Mark and Greg, Malik Willis wasn't even taken in the first round, because there are a lot of places I could have projected he would go. But again, this is where the next couple of days will be interesting. We did a show about this earlier a week, right, Greg? When we talked about some of the other quarterbacks, I talked about Bailey Zapp, Matt Corral, was it Desmond Ryder, and I'm trying to remember who the other guys. A lot of the dominoes will drop there over the next couple days, perhaps even tonight. But you are so right. I'm surprised that Malik Willis ended up. But you know what? Again, though, I'm glad Kenny Pickett ended up going. But Kenny Walker, I am so glad you brought him up, Greg. I really am. Here's a guy that single-handedly beat Michigan on his own last year. That was Michigan's only loss until they ended up going to the college football playoffs. And so don't sell some of these guys short.
Well, again, not only that, Jalen Hurts now has some targets.
Right. Yeah, Mark, I think you were dead on. I think the Jets had an excellent draft. Yeah. And the Giants did too. And I'll tell you one thing, I like the coaching staff with the Giants. You know what? Daniel Jones did not get his fifth-year option picked up. Means you're going to it's a prove-it kind of contract. If you're worth it, you get franchised. If you don't, you don't. But when we talk about the teams in Florida, which is where we're going to continue on going forward before we wrap it up, okay, right now, 2 teams are incomplete. They haven't even picked. And the other one, to me, the Jaguars, I think, are headed in the right direction. But I like the fact that they have a Super Bowl pedigree coach in Doug Peterson. And he's the one guy that, he'll work well with Trent Baalke. But when you have a Super Bowl ring, guys, okay, I think people pay attention. And I think the one thing that people tend to forget about Jacksonville is if Doug Peterson leaves with a winning record, he may have a statue in front of that place because Jacksonville's a giant football town waiting to wake up. And I've seen it when it was good. And I tell you right now, when you're in a small town and you're winning, I'll tell you one thing, folks, there's nothing better than being the big kahuna there.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, and I don't know if you had to pick your favorite Jaguar of all time, give me Baselli.
Oh, is it going in the Hall of Fame, Mark? Come on,
seriously. I mean, just give me him. The quarterbacks there, I really like Bortles a lot there. I just didn't think he was utilized, and they screwed up his psyche a little because they should have rode him when he single-handedly went into Pittsburgh in that playoff game. I mean, I don't know what happened to him afterwards, but I've always liked Blake Bortles.
Yeah, I had no problem with Blake. There was nothing wrong with Blake Bortles. It's a product of the system and the coaching staff or lack thereof. A lot of Blake. I will end it on this note. Then we can call it a night. Blake Bortles has probably won more playoff games than a lot of current quarterbacks that are out there that haven't won any. And if that's the case, I can even tell you, even Tim Tebow won a playoff game. But at least we could take Matthew Stafford out of the goose egg column because me being a Detroiter by nature, okay, that's that. Another thing I should point out, Fire Up Michigan debuts next week. My name is Scott Morganroth, along with Mark Mancini. George Eichhorn will join it next week. Greg Fuchs, obviously, will handle the Florida side. George Eichhorn and I and Mark will handle the Michigan side. So we'll get some of that information out there as well. But I'll tell you what, this is Fire Up Florida. My name is Scott Morganroth, Motor City Madmouth. Please be joined by Madman Mark Mancini, my brother from another mother, who probably has more energy than anybody I've ever seen on the Pacific Coast. And here I am in the East Coast via the Midwest. And, of course, Greg even-keeled Fuchs. All he does is right, and all he does is write real well. Okay, so if you need a guy that's a much better writer than Greg Fuchs, try to find him, but I am partial toward my guy because he's a product of my system. This show right now, you can find our show on the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. Please go ahead and subscribe to it. Mark Mancini Sports will also be promoting it as well. And Mark, one last time to let everybody know a little bit about Mark Mancini and the information that they can get a hold of you.
Well, I'll tell you can get a hold of me, mancinisports@yahoo.com. My email, you can get a hold of me just listening to some of the things I'm part of, XM Sirius radio Friday nights, 10 p.m. on the West Coast, and doing that Pittsburgh Pirate podcast Mondays and Fridays, wherever the Pirates are. And they'll be in your hometown, baby, in Detroit. So we'll be doing it from Detroit come Monday as the Tigers and Bucks get on a 2-game series. Little Cabrera talk, brother.
Yeah, sure will. But, Fire Up Florida is a production of the South Florida Tribune, and we are partnering with Mancini Sports to bring this show out there as well. So all the shows that Mark and I do together, we go out there and partner up together. I'm also pleased to be on the show with Bruce Kessinger out in Oakland. I also had an opportunity to come out with the Philly Smack on a Thursday night as well. So you give those folks a shout out. I enjoyed being on there. I know I enjoy making a lot of appearances across Mancini Sports as well. And of course, Greg obviously is my partner in crime. Our website's www.southfloridatribune.com, and you can email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com as well. My wife, Candy, does a phenomenal job putting everything up together. Without her, I don't think we have anything anyways. You want to reach us on Twitter @TribuneSouth gets it done. And if I can't talk any faster, then God only knows anyone will. And I'm just getting warmed up because I have the draft later on. But I'll tell you what, Friday night, it'll be a fire-up show of some kind. Either it'll be Florida, Michigan, Scott Morganroth, Mark Mancini, Greg Fuchs, Roy Eichhorn later, and whoever else we bring on. And as I mentioned earlier at the top of the broadcast, this is not a one-trick pony, folks. If it's a non-sports related subject, we will talk about it. If it's a sports-related subject, we will talk about it. It depends on whatever feels good and whatever is trending at that time. So, Greg, any closing thoughts?
My closing thought on the draft is my favorite pick in the first round was actually by the New York stinking Jets, trading back into the first round to get FSU defensive end Jermaine Johnson. That late in the draft, thought it was a steal, and I think he's going to be one of the top 5 players in this entire draft.
So any other closing thoughts about Greg Fuchs?
You can get my articles on southfloridatribune.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at gfuchs, at Gregory Fuchs.
All right, Mark, Madman Mancini, give it to us one more time.
ManciniSports@yahoo.com. You can catch me on XM Sirius, the Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, across the board. Over here, Fire Up Florida. We got the Detroit One Man, the Philly Smack on WWDB on Thursdays. Marianne Costello and Sal Tartaglia. I am so blessed, man. Thank you very much for the opportunity here.
No problem. Another shout out to Lou Landers, too, another guy that I've been able to work with, too.
Lou's a great
really
guy,
good.
man. Intentional dog.
Yeah, he does a good job on our baseball show. But again, we'll have more prompts later on. So meanwhile, that's it for Fire Up Florida, Act 1. Looking forward to doing a lot more of these. These are the 3 principles here. As long as they're around, we'll do it. We're going to keep the show going on no matter what. Really feel our first act was a good one. But as Tony Kornheiser would say, okay, let's see if we can do better the next time. So on behalf of Greg Fuchs and Madman Mancini, my name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Fire Up Florida. And let's enjoy the rest of the NFL draft, and we'll have something coming at you in a couple of weeks. Take care and good evening, everybody.
Thank you.